Welcome back to Noble Fury Podcast. Today, Jeff, we've got something we need to unpack. We're going to continue on the D.B. Cooper case, this huge hijacking, the only unsolved hijacking in U.S. history. And we, of course, did the first podcast, had a lot of fun with it, had a great response. But it feels like, we should take a closer look at some of the things we talked about and some of the things we missed.
Well, there are a lot of details, I think, that in the course of our conversation last time on D.B. Cooper, we just didn't get to because of time and constraints. So I think we're going to try to touch on FBI evidence. We're going to try to touch on the money a little bit more. We're going to try to touch on some of the details surrounding alternative explanations that we haven't heard heretofore, possibly, and a few other things too on top of that.
Sure, it's really what do we really know, right?
Yeah.
What are the things that are established from the evidence in this thing? Do you want me to shoot first, or
Go ahead.
Well, ripping through some of the stuff, obviously the hijacker, D.B. Cooper became known as D.B. Cooper, jumped out of a Boeing 727. He was at 10,000 feet. We know these things. There were severe weather conditions, including 7 degrees below zero Fahrenheit, 200-mile-an-hour winds. We talked about some of this in the first podcast about how disorienting that would be and how difficult it would be at 7 degrees below zero. What are your motor functions and how
frozen hands?
Yeah.
How do you pull your chute, the cord, the release cord, when your hand is practically frozen solid?
Sure, minimal motor function. Not to mention a 200-mile-an-hour wind. Stick your hand out the freeway at 85 miles an hour, right?
Yeah.
And see what you're fighting. Some of the real key evidence involved in the case, obviously, is the tie, the J.C. Penney tie, which we talked about, and the aerospace materials that are contained on the tie, and what that relationship is to his possible working in the aerospace industry.
And as we mentioned last time, I think when we're talking about Milton Vordhall as a possible suspect, my secret suspect, that clip-on tie would have been the kind of attire that a professional working in in management and as a scientist in metallurgy would have worn clip-on ties, because machinery could have grabbed hold of the tie and they would have been choked to death but for a clip-on tie. Yeah. So that would have been the kind of tie a person would have actually had.
Sure. Yeah. And in addition to the tie, we had the cigarette butts, which were ultimately lost or disposed of, which is a little crazy.
Not only the cigarette butts, right? The 8 cigarette butts, the FBI, Larry Carr, who took over the investigation between 2007 and 2010 after Ralph Himmelsbach, who was the original lead investigator from 71 through to the 2000s, early aughts. When Larry Carr took over, he kind of tried to modernize the investigation, the approach, all the amassing all the evidence, all the information. And he has said publicly that the cigarette butts are nowhere to be found. They've lost them. By the way, that's not the only thing that's been lost.
Well, the glass, right?
The glass that could have contained, that's right, the bourbon and soda that he drank, that's missing. Also, importantly, they had a hair sample that was discovered. It was brought to a lab, put on a slide. It was actually prepared for a slide. And that too,
microscope, like for
a microscope slide for analysis. You can look at the hair, learn something about it. That too was mislaid, lost, damaged, who knows, but it's gone forever.
It really defies logic, a little bit like Apollo 11, where the NASA guys taped over the video.
What do you do? What do you do with the most important video ever recorded by humanity?
You tape over it because you need a blank tape.
Yeah. You record on something else on it. Yeah.
So they got rid of it. They didn't have room to store the cigarette butts and the glasses or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And then
but in all fairness,
sure,
there was no concept of DNA analysis in 1971.
Well, what happened? There was a scientist who ended up actually winning the laureate, the Nobel Prize for his research in this, but it was really evolving in the late 70s. 72 is when he was awarded, so it's about a year later.
But there was no technology to actually do that at the time, right?
Sure. This becomes very beginning of
you don't really have DNA analysis being conducted until the 2000s.
Yeah, and then the last piece of evidence quickly is the approximately $5,800 that was found along the Columbia River.
Yeah, you've done some research on that specifically. What do you know?
Well, if there's a lot to do with where the money was found in relationship to where theoretically D.B. Cooper jumped. Yeah. And there's an interesting one of the many DB sleuths online, a gentleman whose last name is Ulyss. He's got a really profound theory that we've all been looking in the wrong places for DB Cooper, either the body or the evidence, based on the fact that we have the flight path wrong. And of course, if you have the flight path wrong, then you're looking along a flight path, however wide the swath, you're going to be looking in the wrong place. You can look all day. You're not going to find anything if you're miles away. His theory is that they were 8, 9, 10 miles off.
So how does that relate to the found $5,880?
Well, there's some stuff about the money that's particularly interesting. And one of the things about the money is that the location of the find was 9 miles downstream from Vancouver, which...
So this is along the Columbia River, for those who don't know, and in an area called Tena Bar. Mm-hmm. And Tena Bar is kind of like a beach head along the side of the Columbia River.
T-E-N-A, Tena Bar.
Tena Bar, that's right.
And so apparently the location was 9 miles downstream from Vancouver, which contradicted the initial FBI search area. So where the money was found in relation to where they were looking... How many miles is that?
Well,
they said that's a good question. I do know that the geological analysis indicated that the money arrived at Tena Bar between 1974 and 1975. Now, how do they know that? Well, the secondary displacement from an upstream location. So basically what they're doing is looking at the sediment, and they have obviously geological surveys and understanding how much ground is next to the river, how low the water level is, and what depth the money was found in relation to the sediment buildup, and have pinpointed that the money arrived at that location that it was found in between 74 and 75. Odd, right? How did it get there in 1974? 3 years approximately later than when DB Cooper jumped out of the plane in that area, theoretically, right?
Yeah.
So it's
so is the suggestion that it was carried there via water, via stream current?
The other things they were saying is, besides the secondary displacement, there's interference with the natural river sediment layers. So in other words, these things are in proximity to other natural layers occurring along the river, which are unexplained, right? It doesn't fit the timeline. And then the wording I have here says evidence of human activity affecting money placement. I'm not sure what they mean by that. But
so a boy, an 8-year-old boy, Brian Ingram, in 1980 was camping with his father, and he was trying to prepare a little area for a campfire. And so he took his arm, and he kind of was sort of clearing dirt to make a flat 3 inches, a mere 3 inches below the surface, the area where he was trying to build this campfire area. He found the money. He found this money.
Yeah,
and this money was all self-contained. And many of the bills were destroyed or had been not really destroyed, but they had been eroded, decayed, and so the edges were missing, and what you're left with is partial serial numbers or full serial numbers on again this $5,880. Now, these bills were all wrapped. These $20 bills were wrapped in bands by the bank. These are bank bands, these sort of paper tapes that are sort of sealed with glue adhesive, and they were still in those paper bands.
Intact in essence. I mean, obviously deteriorated, but still in place.
Yeah.
And so, my note here says, one might surmise, finding any DBC money, any DB Cooper money, you'd think would lead to a breakthrough in the case. And all the money did was really lend more mystery and more intrigue. It's really odd.
The interesting thing about that location in Tena Bar is, Brian Ingram, 1980, finds it. Well, my secret suspect, Milton Vordhall, when he was a lad...
You're talking about from our first podcast.
From the first podcast.
Okay.
My secret suspect, he had vacationed in that very area when he was a young boy. He and his father used to camp there. I think they hunted in the woods nearby, and they camped nearby. So he was very familiar with Tena Bar.
That's a big coincidence, man.
And came there himself as a young man often. Yeah. And the money happened to be found right there.
Hard to deny that. What a crazy coincidence!
It's at least a coincidence.
Sure. It's certainly convenient. So picking back up a minute ago about some of the other things that we've established about what really happened. We realized that obviously the hijacker, DB Cooper, he deployed the aft stairs, the stairs at the back of the plane during the flight. The pressure differential created was about 140 pounds, which is interesting. Not a lot of weight differential. It did activate a warning light in the cockpit. So if you're you're the pilot, you've been instructed to stay up there. Nobody come out. Nobody can move. I'm in the back of the plane with a bomb, and so they can't do anything to determine what his activity is. But in the cockpit, a light goes off to show you that the rear stairs have been lowered. So they have the almost exact time precision, what time the stairs were lowered between 8:13 and 8:15. And the stairs remained lowered at 8:13, and sometime between 8:13 and 8:15, they presume he jumped. The plane did there was apparently a little bit of an upward pitch in the plane, which is significant. That might, I know you've got some theories that run against that, and I think it's interesting. You have a great theory to reveal in a bit, which I love, and there's some intrigue, and the pitch doesn't eliminate that, Jeff, but it just lends more mystery to what really happened. Where did he go?
Right,
and when did he go?
Right.
So,
I just was going to ask, so with respect to the money, the found money, did other searches take place after young Brian Ingram found that money?
Well, first of all, there was a bunch of rogue local citizens and people, treasure hunters. People got in their car, presumably, and drove to the beach and said, "I'm going to dig around and find the other 193,200 or whatever it is," right? Thinking the money could be buried along that beach somewhere. So, you have these people, these metal detectors, they're just getting on their hands and knees. So I'm sure there was, informal searches, but I know that some of the aerial photographs I saw had the entire beach. They had it all roped off, and they had a grid, and they were digging in certain areas and then moving to certain areas and not repeating themselves and not disturbing evidence, and trying theoretically to document where they looked and what they found. They found nothing else, obviously.
So the thing that sort of raises my eyebrows about the money is the nature of the sediment. So wasn't there some sort of natural phenomenon that took place, or a man-made phenomenon where that area was flooded for a while? What happened with that?
Well, there was initially some thought that the school of thought was that the money, he landed in the river, or the money landed in the river, or he dropped the money, or he dropped some of the money in the river. This is explaining where the $5,800 came from. And if it went down the river a short ways and was somehow beached, washed ashore, so to speak, and then settled, and then apparently, there was a U.S. geological project where they flooded this river, the Columbia River. Well, this lent a whole bunch of, there was a big hugabaloo about what happened. Wait a minute, this changes everything. The river was flooded. The water came up, could have moved the money to a new location. Then they carefully determined that by coincidence, according to the geological surveys, that the flood started 150 feet farther down the river than where the money was actually found, meaning, theoretically, that this flooding of the river, not by much, by only 150 feet, wouldn't have had any bearing on, obviously, the final resting place of the money. Make sense?
Yeah.
So I think the money, again, it's so crazy that you found the actual money he had. He jumped off the plane. We found some of the money, and we didn't find anything else. Nothing else from D.B. Cooper. No other money.
Well, and that by itself has lent some support to those who say the guy, he jumped out, parachute did not deploy, or did deploy. He went kerplunk in the river, in the Columbia. And then he was swept out to sea, and that's why we've never seen neither hair nor hide.
A parachute would float, wouldn't it?
I think the parachute would float, and I think the money. I think he'd been weighted down as well.
Right.
He would not have floated.
I mean, think if parachutes traditionally sank, you have people jumping out of jets into the ocean, abandoning the jet in a ejector situation. You couldn't have a parachute that would pull someone into the. I mean, so no. Parachutes would have to float.
Sure,
they would float certainly by the sort of the bioengineering of the material, nylon in essence.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was nylon in 1971. But
yes, of course. In fact, the pink parachute that was found on board, which is kind of interesting. We didn't talk about this. It was a chest chute. It was a reserve chute, and
26-foot Navy parachute.
The chest chute, the small one. So it was pink in color, and some people have been saying that it's actually silk, but it was an early nylon. parachute.
Sure.
Kind of a ripstop material.
Right.
But the interesting thing about that chute is it appears that 5 of the cords. So you imagine a parachute that's sort of opened up.
Like a puppet,
and
right?
It's got all these cords coming down, right? And they come together in a bundle. Well, 5 of those cords were cut away from the reserve chute. So it appears
that's on the bag that they found, right?
It would have been in the bag.
Yeah.
So some people have speculated that he pulled the chute out in order to try to repurpose that bag for carrying the money. It'd have been too small to carry the amount of money he had. But 5, I think the first report was 3 of those lines were
Nylon
missing.
cords, yeah.
But it turns out that 5 are missing now.
Was there 8 total? How many did you say?
I don't know what the total is.
Okay.
But it was a large number. You can imagine a parachute's going to have a lot of these cords.
Sure.
So they're missing because they were cut free, but the way they were cut was the knots themselves were kind of sawed out. So if you were, in a time crunch, which looks like you may have been trying to jump out of an airplane, you would have just cut these lines really quickly.
Sure.
This person, however they cut them, sawed the knots to prevent, to release the cord from
Leaving
the
no
chute
remnant,
upright.
in other words.
Yeah.
No rope
so,
remnant.
So,
Yeah.
so it's kind of interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I suspect that if it was D.B. Cooper, he used that cording in order to put lanyards around his body to hold fast that sack of money he had.
Right. Right.
So if he'd had 5 cords, how many ever he needed, he'd had enough length to properly.
It sounds like I'm being funny. I'm being serious. At 200 miles an hour, spinning in the dark in a heavy rain, you would need that thing really, really roped to your body because you're not holding it.
Yeah. So this, which calls to mind the placard sign that was attached to the rear stair, warning about this being a stair, and it was dangerous to be on this, and don't open during flight, and so forth. Was maybe 9 inches by 9 inches.
You're talking about with the plane's parked. It's a warning thing about warning.
No. There's stair
and labeled though. I'm on the plane.
And it's like it's just like a placard, like a sign. Painted sign that says, do not open this stair in flight and so forth. And it was attached to the stair system so that when the stair systems open up, you can still see the sign there attached to it. Well, we don't know how, but it could be the wind. It could have been being opened, at 10,000 feet, 200-mile winds. It ripped it off of the assemblage, and it was found much later. And so I believe this person that you were referring to, Eric Ullis, he referred to Ullis. He referred to that sign as being an example of why this plane was on a different course than it was originally investigated.
Yeah, he's got a really interesting theory, and his theory is really based on, as I mentioned earlier, and mentioning again a little more detail quickly. His theory, he spent a lot of time, and he's pretty articulate, and he's done a lot of research, and he's pretty passionate about it. Like many of these DB sleuths, right, Jeff? There's a lot of them out there that have really invested a lot of time and effort in trying to find something that hasn't been discovered yet. Eric Ullis's position is that the FAA, for whatever reason, did not have the actual flight path of the 727 on this fateful evening. That in fact, either out of desperation or out of the accuracy, lack of accuracy, they had the F-16 fighter jets that were shadowing the plane. They had their flight paths. Now, there's a whole thing going on about how the F-16s can't, if they're the F-16s or F-1s or whatever jet they were, the fighter pilots, planes, were shadowing the 727, but because of the airspeed that we've talked a lot about 200, they couldn't go that slow. So their flight path is going to be different. They also were brought up into the air.
Well, the flight path wouldn't necessarily, they might be ahead or behind, but their path wouldn't necessarily be different.
Correct. I think they may have, the question, they were trying to stay out of view, so they were a mile up, and they were also trying to apparently do some S to slow down because they're flying too fast. And so that might change their flight pattern to some small degree. But Eric Ullis's theory is that the that we've all been looking in the wrong place for DB Cooper, that the flight path that the FAA reported is inaccurate, and that throws this whole thing. And that would explain where the money is. His theory places the money on the flight path that he shows, that he thinks the night that the 727
Well, that
took.
sign was found, and it was found many miles away from where it was expected to be if it were below in the flight path.
Yeah.
But that's not very convincing evidence to me, because at 10,000 feet in the air, 10,000 feet is still 2 miles above. And as we've said, winds were something like 200 miles per hour.
At that elevation.
Because of the speed of the aircraft that you're jumping out of.
Elevation.
So if this placard is flung off, it would be like it were in a tornado. This is even faster than most hurricane kind of winds. This is tornado style winds. This sign could have been blown a mile or many miles off of course in the air and landed wherever. It would be like a Frisbee. If you could imagine a Frisbee at 200 miles an hour.
Could end up
from
miles
10,000
away.
It could be miles away from where it was supposed to be. So that bit of evidence is not very persuasive to me.
I wonder if, and I'm not trying to be funny, I wonder if the sign off that 727 was missing, or because if you worked in the aerospace industry,
No, it was. It's
known to be that sign.
It's known to be that
Okay,
sign.
good,
Yeah, that
good.
was the sign from the airplane.
Because I wouldn't put it past DB Cooper to take a sign off another plane and throw it into the
Yeah,
woods and
hey,
say,
look.
"Hey, look over here, everybody."
Yeah, he's crafty that way.
Yeah, he is. By the way, speaking of your FBI agents, the two names you brought up earlier.
Himmelsbach, which is the first guy, and then the next one was Larry Carr. Larry Carr.
One of those two, I'm not sure which, did it.
Larry Carr was 2007 and 2010, and then follow up from that, the guy that finished it up, that closed off the case, was Curtis Ng, and he's the one who closed it in 2016.
Somebody made a disparaging comment that they were tired of hearing that DB Cooper was this, overly capable parachute expert, and they were like, he thought this guy's not that. It was interesting because he was tired of hearing the praise about how crafty and intelligent and verse he was in the world of parachuting.
Yeah.
And he was thinking, from the evidence I have, this guy wasn't that great.
Yeah.
Wasn't that smart at that.
Well, we don't know. We just don't know, right? You don't know until
200
you
miles
have
an hour, 7 degrees below zero. Are you ready for that?
Well, apparently, though, there have been a number of people who have done this challenge. They've jumped out at 10,000 feet and at approximately, the same kind of temperatures at night, and they've been okay. So it can be done. It dressed in the same way that DB Cooper was dressed. I do want to bring up one little thing that I kind of looked into, which is the technology to track airplanes at the time in 1971. These airplanes, they fly in highways, which air highways essentially. And so when you have a flight path, you have to be very careful that you don't run into other commercial aircraft in that flight path, right? And so that highway is very carefully controlled by air traffic controllers. And GPS, as we know it today, did not exist then, but they used different systems, a VOR-TOC system. And for instance, it would have radio beacons all along the highway on the ground.
Sending out.
And as a plane passed, it would communicate with that radio signal. It has its own receiver. And there's
allowing you to pinpoint.
Well, there's a dial on the aircraft that shows you how far away you are from that transmission, and you calibrate your steering to get those needles lined up so that you're going always on the path of the VOR transmitter from the ground, and so by the way, it wasn't much earlier than that where you would have pilots use sextants just like captains of seagoing vessels would use for hundreds and thousands of years possibly.
Not autopilot.
They use a not autopilot. And then there's dead reckoning. Well, dead reckoning can't be used on that night because it was cloudy and rainy, and it was at night. So you can't dead reckon very well at night. So, but the radar systems itself would have kept that plane flying to Nevada, Reno, probably in a pretty tight corridor. Now, I don't know how tight. I don't know what the tolerances were in 1971, but it had to be good enough that you didn't have midair collisions between several different aircraft.
Right. And back to that's all. This sort of feeds a little bit of this point, which is Eric Ulis was quite pronounced in his proclamation that he was using Occam's razor, using this theory where he was trying to eliminate some of these other, what may be secondary, information and technical information, and trying to strip this thing down to what are the core things? What do we really know? What's the equation here? And let's draw some conclusions from that. And so I give him credit for that, because you can. Yeah. It's all nuanced. It's all layered, and you can pile.
And we don't know. Now, the other thing, when I was looking at avionics in preparation for this, the military aircraft that you talked about, these F-16s, they used an entirely different system than the commercial aviation world used. And so they were able to track flight paths of military aircraft within 5 meters back then.
Yeah.
So that's pretty tight, 5 meters.
20 feet.
Yeah.
Give or take.
Yeah. So commercial was not nearly as well or as sophisticated and as tightly calibrated, but the military was. And so I'm not sure if those flight paths were anything like, which they sounds like they had to be in order to follow a commercial airplane. You've got to be flying a certain path that the commercial airline is following.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, by the way, I think something pretty interesting. Some of the things, one of the takeaways from the result of this hijacking was, D.B. Cooper single-handedly changed, aviation, commercial flying by one. They started requiring some form of ID when somebody flies. It seems crazy not to have done that, but before that, remember we used to buy, you could buy a ticket and just get on a plane, apparently. And the second thing is, apparently something came out of this called Cooper's vane, which is it's an odd term, vane, I guess, like as in weather vane. But quickly they added something to the body of these 727s, which would not allow the lower stairs to be, the back stairs, the aft stairs to be lowered during flight. And they did it in it's a really smart way, which is not that there's a switch in the cockpit, because somebody could get in the cockpit and hold a gun to somebody's head and say, lower the
stairs. They didn't lock the cockpits back then.
No, right, exactly. They really had a simple flap that was affected by airflow, the airstream. So when the jet's in motion, this flap is engaged and locked, and the stairs won't come down. When the plane is parked, the stairs will go down. So it was removed any opportunity to manually manipulate the stairs.
That's interesting, but there have been people, so modern aircraft, when the door that the passengers come in through, when that's sealed, if you look at the way it's shaped, it kind of forms a kind of like a wedge. Mm-hmm. And so the internal air pressure, that it's high, it keeps the whole plane kind of sealed. It expands out and keeps it sealed. There's a movement. So you're not theoretically supposed to be able to open, even if it were unlocked, you couldn't open the door in flight. Well,
because it's too snug. It's snug closed.
It's being sucked in, essentially.
Right.
Well, people have opened them, and so these have come open. So even though theory says that this should work a certain way, it's actually happened.
Which is sort of the underpinning of this whole case, right? Like things that seem like
they're supposed to be that way.
Yeah, like your logic, your explanation makes perfect sense, and in fact is provable. Yet people are opening these things, and I don't know how or why.
It's not very free. It's not very common. But I don't think I don't think you could do it at 30,000 feet.
Somebody recently was indicted for opening up. They got
right.
up and had a big dispute, and all of a sudden had to get off the plane at 30,000 feet.
That's right. That's right.
And so the doors do open.
They do.
So yeah, they need to put the Cooper vane on those doors.
That's right.
So you can't
maybe the Cooper vane doesn't work either.
Oh, that's another podcast.
They stopped having the stair in the back, didn't they?
All right. So what do we got as a takeaway?
Well, so I've got a couple of things. I want to run quickly through this. So importantly, the FBI, based on the eyewitness testimony, put D.B. Cooper's age at about 45 years old, mid-40s. And so in 1971, if you were in your mid-40s, you would be today about 100 years old. Now, if you're 100 years old, great for you, but very, very few people have made it to 100 years old. Even though it seems like everybody's living to 100 now, it is still extremely rare.
2,000 people, I would think.
So it is very, unless you're on the Social Security rolls, then apparently there are hundreds of people, thousands, millions of people that are 100 years old. But 100-year-old is a pretty rare thing in the world. And so it is very likely, I hate to break this news, but it's very likely that D.B. Cooper, whoever D.B. Cooper is dead and really long dead, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Again, 45 and 71. Just do the math.
Yeah, and by the way, some of that same demographic picture about his height, there was a whole thing about how, some of those suspects, the McCoy and Rackstraw, they needed to be that 6 foot or 6'1". In 1971, the average height of the
was lower.
Yeah, so that was a fairly unusual demographic thing. So speaking of age and height, and all in the equation of how it fits.
Now, in the off chance that there's a still alive 100-year-old who committed this crime, I started thinking, the statute of limitations is probably long expired.
Yeah.
So air piracy was the first charge. And so we have this agent, the first agent Himmelsbach. FBI agent. His initial charge in absentia, because you're not there, was air piracy. Well, air piracy, this federal air piracy law, has a statute of limitations of 5 years. So in 1976, just before the statute of limitations told on the air piracy charge, he put before a grand jury an indictment in absentia under the Hobbs Act. And the Hobbs Act was an act that Congress enacted in 1946. And the Hobbs Act was really something to be used initially. It was designed to prevent labor unions from committing crimes.
It's been in the news lately. It's recently been in the news.
So this is mainly extortion. It's racketeering, things that labor unions were doing, and that the Supreme Court a few years before, 1943, the Supreme Court had a case where they made an exception to racketeering laws for labor unions. So labor unions were strong-arming people and using extortion, and the Supreme Court said labor unions are exempt from that kind of criminality. So Congress said, Supreme Court, you're wrong. We're going to overrule you. And they enacted the Hobbs Act. And the Hobbs Act has no statute of limitations.
So what you're saying is he preserved?
So Hobbs Act, Anti-Extortion Act, it's designed and used for public corruption. So if government officials are working with labor unions, organized crime, people working government and non-government, but in some kind of organized crime, racketeering, organized labor, extortions, that sort of thing. Elements are robbery. You have to commit some kind of unlawful taking of property. It has to involve extortion, that is actual force or threatened use of force, violence or fear. And you have to have some kind of a crime that affects commerce. So,
all three boxes are
all
checked.
All three boxes seem to be checked on the elements. So this seems to be... Now, what I would say is, in the off chance that D.B. Cooper were alive, they're certainly going to follow up with this Hobbs Act. I think, though, that it's possible, because he's an individual, and the way the Hobbs Act was constructed, it was really constructed from organizations, a labor union doing something it shouldn't do, politicians doing something to do in the capacity of a leader. And so the Hobbs Act, I don't know if it probably has. I mean, the federal government's trained every law it can on individuals, but it also applies to individuals, but I suspect that there may be some different application of it for individuals.
So you think
versus
this is the
an
reason
organization.
why he never came forward, because he could have still been charged? Is that?
He could have still been charged.
Yeah, and that was a really smart thing to do, because you do think he would have gone on a book tour and been on every talk show.
Yeah,
and
you would say, hey,
you might say, well, I didn't do it, but if I did,
Now, I want to finish up with my theory here.
Okay.
Now, I'm not saying that this even has a remote chance of being accurate, but it's something that's crossed my mind more than once, and it is this. What if D.B. Cooper never jumped from the airplane at all? The whole staircase was a ruse. The parachutes were a ruse.
So in other words, he lowers the staircase and then goes somewhere in the belly of the plane.
he hides out. Now, this is a person who seemed to know the ins and outs of aircraft very well. If this person were truly working in the aviation industry, which many of the leading suspects seem to have some background in aviation, there are spots on airplanes that you could get into in the heating and cooling system, the HVAC venting, right? There are cavities where a lot of the wiring runs. You don't want the wiring just
You've
out,
seen too many
out-
Mission Impossible movies, Jeff. Come on, he's climbing into the HVAC.
You don't want the wiring exposed to baggage and things bumping into it. So it's put into cavities, but they're large enough that a person could sort
You
of
have to service them, too.
You have to service the wires.
Yeah.
You have to service the HVAC system. So even though you've got the airframe in this sort of circular shape, there are little eaves and portals and areas that a person could get into. Now, what if his little paper bag, which many people don't remember, he carried with him? He was known to have a
What
paper
was in the bag?
What
Yeah.
was in the bag?
Yeah.
Could that been a set of tools that he was carrying that he could have opened a compartment with? Could it have been maybe even an oxygen mask, and oxygen to keep him.
Well,
have
10,000
enough-
feet, he wouldn't have needed oxygen if last time went back
But
up.
after he left plane, after he jumped the plane, did they still maintain 10,000 feet?
Good question.
We don't know.
Yeah.
And so if he were in a depressurized area of the plane, then maybe he wouldn't have been he would have had no oxygen, and so he needed to keep something in there. I don't know what was in the
So
bag.
you're thinking maybe there's a small chance.
I'm saying that there is a small chance. So the plane continues on its way. It lands in Reno, Nevada. It is thoroughly investigated, presumably by the FBI. But did the FBI, this is the same FBI that lost the cigarette butts, that didn't take the glass, that lost the hairs. Is this the same FBI that maybe they didn't go through every single compartment on the plane? And why would they have?
It's wildly possible. Here's my
And that way, we can explain several things. You mentioned Occam's razor. Let's use Occam's razor. Is it not easier to stay on board the plane in a hidey hole somewhere where you don't have to worry about 7 degrees below zero, where you don't have to worry about rain, where you don't have to worry about 200 miles an hour wind, where you don't have to worry about the parachute
you don't have
working?
to worry about dropping the money or hitting a tree.
You don't have to worry about anything.
Yeah.
You stay in your little compartment. The plane lands. It's searched thoroughly.
And think about it, Jeff. The FBI would immediately initiate this huge search. Their attention is outward.
Yeah.
It's not inward.
It's
towards
not
the plane.
inward.
It's all over where
this
he
is
landed.
how a magician is able to do their tricks. It's prestidigitation.
Yeah.
It's Ledgerman. What do? You keep somebody occupied with this hand, and this hand you're doing something else.
Yeah. And I wouldn't put it past D.B. Cooper.
It's possible. I'm not saying it's. I've not read much about this, but it's something that's always sort of been at the sort of back of my mind. Like maybe he never jumped at all. Maybe he had. He was seen at the back of the plane fidgeting with his bags and all that. The stairs come down. They don't see him anymore. Could he have slid into a compartment somewhere in the belly of the plane?
Maybe the astronauts never got off Apollo 11. Who knows?
Maybe
We'll
they
have to
never
look
did.
into that.
Yeah. Hey,
Great. Really fun, Jeff. Thanks.
Lots
buddy.
of fun.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.